Hi,
Good afternoon.
what are you talking about?
What's going on here? History, politics.
Let's talk about history.
About history?
Yeah,
How do you feel about the Soviet Union?
like a historical event that fell apart 30-something years ago.
So, was it a good or bad example?
Good or bad, that's an ethical judgment. The Soviet Union collapsed. We can talk about the reasons for the creation of the Soviet Union, the stages of its existence, the reasons for its collapse, why it fell apart, but was it good or bad? For me, if you bring it down to that level, well, bad.
Well, why do you think it collapsed?
Because an authoritarian system that doesn't allow competition within itself can't last long. Because a non-market economy, which again lacks competition, can't survive. And so on. Plus the sanctions that were imposed on the Soviet Union because of the invasion of Afghanistan and so on. A state based on inhumane principles couldn't last long. It lasted for 70 years and then fell apart.
Inhumane. That's a strong word. Why do you say it's a strong word? Inhumane, as if people couldn't survive?
Inhumane principles, you see? If in Europe and North America the principles are democratic, where power, at least in some way, the government responds to the people. But in the Soviet Union, the authorities didn't respond to the people at all. If in Europe and North America there was a market-based competitive economy, here it was a state-run economy that served the military-industrial complex and ended up devouring itself. These are inhumane principles. Humane principles are a market economy and democracy.
All right. You're a historian, right?
4.
100 years of rule, in your opinion, from a historical perspective, who is the best president, the best leader? Why?
To you, I'll answer your question now. Why do you always have a czar in your head? The best form of government is democracy, not some ruler or president. Prime Minister, First Secretary. This is the person who must fulfill the wishes of the population.
Well, historically, it turned out that for 100 years, not only presidents ruled, but also tsars ruled, and first secretaries ruled. What am I telling you? Manager, who was more or less normal.
Hedman was a more or less normal manager.
Skoropadsky.
In 1918, in the country of Ukraine,
Well, what did he create? He created the tax.
system, established a state bank, tried to create an army. The system stabilized, both politically and economically, over those 7.5 months. For me, that's the best ruler.
But why, if he was the best, didn't he keep power, didn't keep seat? What was he holding?
On German and Austrian bayonets, and those guys lost the First World War. And if they had won the First World War, the regime would have survived, and everything would have been just fine moving forward.
Well, you're a historian, not a clairvoyant, right?
Well, I can make predictions as a historian, because history, at least to some extent, has a predictive function.
All right. So, if you can make predictions, can you predict when the war will end?
The war will end in the next 5 to 7 years.
Oh no. That's not a very good forecast.
You don't like it, that's your right. You asked me for a prediction, and I gave you one.
No, no, no. I like it too. Like it or not, would you prefer it to be sooner, or do you?
Would you rather it lasted longer?
No, sooner the better.
We need to build, well, normal leaders, even if they are not perfect, who can effectively guide and inspire others, and who possess the necessary qualities to lead with integrity and vision.
Like you said, if there were.
Wait, what normal leaders are you missing? Who do you think is missing? Are you speaking out against Putin?
No, what do you mean against Putin? No, I mean,
Should Putin somehow end this war?
I don't know. I'm predicting you. I'm asking your
Opinion? What other kind of leader do you think is needed to end the war?
what kind of politician? A people's one
What kind? A people's one? What do you mean by that?
who will stop it.
And who can stop it? So you're not against Putin. Putin is a good leader for you. Why can't he stop the war?
Stalin, even though he was a tyrant, Stalin stopped it quickly.
So by being a tyrant.
Let me say it again, look.
The man who started a bunch of wars, you think he would have stopped this one?
Maybe.
How could someone who started World War II have stopped this one? Ah,
Where did he start World War II? Together with Hitler.
in September 1939, Stalin invaded the territory of an independent country called Poland. Both Hitler and Stalin, with a gap of 17 days, started World War II at the same time. Hitler on September 1st, and Stalin on September 17th. Yes, I'm listening to you.
Lenin and Stalin, who, you could say, created the Soviet Union. By bad methods, by good methods, a lot of people died from hunger, from the Civil War. Well, more or less, but they kind of created it. And they still built a lot of factories, a lot of things.
And if Lenin and Stalin hadn't ruled the country, there wouldn't have been any factories. How is that? Were factories in Europe built without Lenin and Stalin? Please explain.
But in history, there was never an if only. Wait a minute.
Factories were being built even back in the Tsarist era. And at the beginning of the 20th century, the Russian Empire was among the 10 most developed countries in the world. Then the Bolsheviks came to power. The Soviet Union wasn't just out of the top 10. It wasn't even in the top 20. And that's despite the fact that factories and plants were being built. Who told you that only Lenin and Stalin built factories and plants, and that without them, nothing would have been built? Well,
Nobody. Nobody else managed to seize power with them. Nobody else won. So it turns out they were the ones who won. And then what?
if they had lost, would there have been no factories on the territory of the Russian Empire, or what?
Let me tell you again.
That before Lenin came to power, The Russian Empire was among the 10 most developed countries in the world. There were factories in the top 10. Then your Bolsheviks came. The Russian
Empire fell apart.
They came to power. But the factories didn't go anywhere. They didn't fall apart. It was the political superstructure that collapsed, because the factories kept working, but then the Bolsheviks came. And by 1921, only 10% of all the factories that had operated in the Russian Empire were still working. They completely destroyed the economy when they came to power. What are you even talking about here?
What do you mean by that?
So, it is unequivocally the Bolsheviks who are to blame for this situation, and that is perfectly clear. Therefore, I urge you to direct your attention here to this specific point and carefully observe the evidence and circumstances that substantiate this assertion, as it is crucial to fully grasp the implications of their actions and the consequences that have unfolded as a direct result of their involvement and decisions in this matter.
Well, you don't really know much about
History. What are you even saying? Ask a question, and I'll answer you. But when you start spouting nonsense,
You might think it's nonsense, but for others it's not.
for others, it's not nonsense. Stalin didn't open anything. Lenin didn't open anything. Stalin didn't open anything.
People who are like,
You are just talking nonsense. You haven't even opened a school textbook. Instead of asking, "Dear teacher, could you please explain what the situation was like before the Bolsheviks came to power? And after they took power, did the Bolsheviks really build factories and plants?" You start telling stories like, Lenin came, Stalin came, and they started building factories and plants. That's utter nonsense.
there was major industrialization in 1930. Starting from 29, I'm not.
Denying it, it began from 29. But under Lenin, the economy dropped to 10% of the pre-war economy.
There was a civil war, after all. I explained to you about the
Civil war that no one physically destroyed the factories. They didn't go anywhere. No one blew up the factories. The factories simply weren't operating because the Bolsheviks were implementing the policy of war communism. And yet, you keep telling me about the Civil War, which supposedly destroyed Russia.
When did the Bolsheviks come to power? In 1917. In 1917, in October.
By 1921, 90% of the economy had been destroyed. And the Civil War wasn't the main reason for this. I've already explained this 3 times.
But I want to hear the reason. They
Came and started destroying.
the whole economy. Is that it?
The reason for what?
The reason. So you said the communists came and started destroying things themselves. The destruction of the economy. You said that in 3 years. Let me explain the reason.
For the destruction of the economy. Before 1917, the Russian Empire had a market economy where businesses were owned by private individuals. And a market economy creates competition, which means products keep getting better and prices keep getting lower. When the Bolsheviks came to power, they tried to establish a planned economy. They took all the factories and plants into state ownership. Workers didn't get paid in money. Money lost its meaning. Workers received food ration coupons. and there was no guarantee that you would actually get food with that coupon. And in this system, when you come to work, put in your 8 or even 10 hours. Instead of money, they give you a little coupon and say, go to the cafeteria. They'll give you a meal for that coupon. You go to the cafeteria, and there they tell you, we have nothing to give you. Come back tomorrow. Maybe there will be a delivery. But you want to eat today, and you have little kids, and your wife is sick in bed. And all you got was a coupon, nothing else. In this system, no one wanted to work. That's why by 1921, the economy had collapsed by 90%. This is what the Bolsheviks did when they came to power. And the Civil War has nothing to do with it.
Nothing feminine.
Haven't you heard about this? In schools? Weren't you told about the policy of war communism?
They didn't tell me. I read about it. Why?
So, look, let's take, for example, the numerous industrial factories, the significant manufacturing facilities that were actively operating and producing goods within the fertile and strategically important Kuban region during the tumultuous historical period of 1918.
That's right. The ones where the Bolsheviks established their power. There was a gap from Stavropol, back and forth in Stavropol. If I'm not mistaken, the power changed hands 3 or 4 times there. So you could end up with Denikin's forces. These factories were destroyed. Somewhere something was ruined. Somewhere there were battles. Somewhere there was theft. Somewhere machines were cut up. Somewhere things were taken away. Somewhere all sorts of things happened.
Things happened everywhere.
Well, how else could it be? First Denikin's troops took over. Then Wrangel's men took over. When this territory
was taken over by Wrangel's and Denikin's forces, they restored the market economy, returned these factories to their previous owners, and the factories started operating again. As soon as the Bolsheviks appeared in your city of Sochi, these factories immediately passed into the hands of the state, and instead of money and wages, workers were given coupons. And the workers stopped going to work and tried to find some way to earn money in the countryside, to leave, to trade something somewhere, because they had to survive. Because working for the Bolsheviks at the factory, it was impossible for a working family to survive. A working family.
Well, in 1918, the territory of Sochi was taken over by the Georgians. Twop's taken Georgians. Taking advantage. Hello, can you hear me?
I'm just listening to you.
And then what happened?
I'm telling you about the basics of economic theory, and you're telling me about the Georgians who took over Sochi. The Georgians took over Sochi. Did they wipe out all the factories in Sochi completely, or not?
Well, they forced locals to work, but locals didn't want to when there was confrontation. I get it, and you have questions for me.
And I'm already tired of listening to your nonsense. Do you have any questions for me?
All right, no questions. Okay. So when did the state of Ukraine appear? Here we go. As a state?
Here we go. In 91. Just like the Russian Federation.
So, on the ruins of the Soviet Union.
Yes. Both your country and ours were created on the ruins of the Soviet Union.
Yeah. I completely agree with you on that. There are some things I don't agree with you on, but, well, I won't argue about it. But here, I totally agree with you. But as for the formation of the state, Ukraine, so when the Russian Empire collapsed, it was, Like Skoropadsky, who came to power, right?
No, that's not right.
How is it then? Who came to power there? The Ukrainian appeared. I'm a bit fuzzy on these details.
It was proclaimed the Ukrainian People's Republic. People's Republic? That was in 1918. It existed. 1917 to 1918? From 1917 to 1921. 3.5 years. The Ukrainian People's Republic existed, with a break of 7.5 months when the Ukrainian state of Hetman Skoropadsky existed. And the Ukrainian People's Republic was taken over by the wonderful Bolsheviks, who built factories and plants, who paid workers huge wages, salaries. Well, that's the kind of thing that happened.
Let's do this, you said. Questions. So, territory. What territory did the Ukrainian People's Republic have at that time?
9 Ukrainian governorates that were part of the former Russian Empire. These are Volyn, Kiev, Podolia, Chernihiv, Kharkiv, Poltava, Yekaterinoslav, Tavria, and Kherson. 9 governorates.
No, just a bit. A little more. So it's clearer to me. Could you maybe go from north to south, from west to east, through these regions? Just so I can get my bearings better.
From Volyn region in the west of modern-day Ukraine.
2.
Luhansk region in the east. From Kiev, Zhytomyr, and Chernihiv regions in the north down to Kherson. Mykolaiv, and Zaporizhia regions in the south. All the lands inhabited by Ukrainians in the Russian Empire. That was the territory of the Ukrainian People's Republic.
But Lviv region wasn't included, right?
Lviv region was part of the Austro-Hungarian monarchy, which also collapsed in 1918.
So this Lviv region, it basically came into being then, out of the ruins of the Russian Empire, too.
The Austro-Hungarian Empire, I just said that.
Yeah, the Austro-Hungarian. My phone's dying, damn, this thing. Hold on a second, just wait. Give me 2 seconds. I'll go get the charger, okay? I'll wait. Do we have time to wait? Of course.
Facepalm. The Bolsheviks came, and they started building factories and plants. The Georgians came to Sochi and started making the workers hunt.
Have you written any works or papers?
What kind?
Like the train story, senior historian. Ah, school textbooks. And just one more thing, if I may. It's just that I'm trying to get the overall picture. They paint you as, like, who are you for? What are you about? So, like, Poland, how did it end up as part of the Russian Empire? Or how did that happen?
Poland was of the German, Austro-Hungarian, and Russian empires.
More so, it ended up in the
Russian one.
Warsaw was part of it, right?
Yes, but
Lviv specifically was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, right?
yes. But during World War I, both the German Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and the Russian Empire all collapsed.
All right. So, you kind of said that the Second World War was started by Stalin and Hitler. But the West, too, like France. When it came to Poland or Czechoslovakia, they were supposed to help when Poland was attacked.
World War II in September 1939, with military actions by Germany and the Soviet Union. What do Britain and France have to do with it? Britain and France on September 3rd. Declared war on Germany.
Well, but they didn't take any action.
Why do you say they didn't?
Well, what actions did they take then? Who told you?
That there were combat operations by the German army against the French? The French army lost. There were military operations in 1940.
But in 1939, the Soviets moved in.
In 1939, they didn't take military action because French hoped to wait behind Maginot Line.
But in 1940,
They suffered defeat. They didn't fulfill their obligations. But they're not to blame for the start of World War II. Why do you want to shift the blame from Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union? No, that's exactly what you're saying. But what about England and France? What about them? What do they have to do with it? Did they attack anyone in September 1939?
All right, next question. So, when Czechoslovakia was being divided, that was after the Munich Agreement, right? Or how exactly was Czechoslovakia divided? Nazi Germany entered, and then, part of it went to Poland as well. You
Are writing this down, right? Poland got a small territory. What does that mean?
Well, what does that mean? You are asking.
Questions that should have an answer and consequences. Yes, they divided Czechoslovakia. Yes, it was illegal. Yes, Hitler took Bohemia for himself, and the Poles took a small territory for themselves. Yes, Slovakia became an independent fascist state. Yes, Transcarpathia, and the south of Slovakia was taken by Hungary. Yes, but what does this have to do with World War II?
These were kind of the prerequisites for the start of World War II. These were
Prerequisites. That's absolutely right. These were the prerequisites. There were a lot of such prerequisites. World War II was started by Hitler and Stalin, but not England and not France.
I'll argue that's your opinion. I'm just listening to you.
So what opinion? People doubt. Historians don't have opinions. Historians have evidence-based conclusions. Those aren't historians who smoked away their history textbook behind the bathroom and now have an opinion and disagree with real historians. You're, for the second time,
Trying to insult me like I was smoking there. I'm not saying.
specifically about you right now. I'm using you as an example to talk about people who never read the textbook, didn't study in school, haven't read a single history book since. Go on Chat Roulette and start saying, well, that's my opinion. Where did you even get this opinion from?
From which point, then?
Historians? One history book. Or which historian did you listen to?
Yeah, well, let's say.
Well, please, you're a reasonable person. Answer the question, personally you. What history book Or which historian did you listen to about, for example, the issues of World War II?
Well, recently I listened to ISOV Tank Breakthrough. So, are you saying he's not a historian or what?
Isov is not a historian to me, and I can explain why.
Well, I'll listen to you.
I'll explain my opinion, just as you want. In your city, Podolsk, near Moscow, there's a huge archive where documents from World War II are kept. There, according to our calculations, which we have, there are about 20 million storage units, well documents. Out of those, 17.5 million storage units are classified as secret and top secret. Only certain historians are allowed into these archives, specifically those who are convenient for the authorities. Mr. Isov, whom you mentioned, is one such historian. He is allowed into this archive. They hand over a folder, for example, marked as classified, and say, "Here you go, Mr. Isov, we're giving you this folder. You can go through it and write an article or a book based on it." Isov, as a historian, and he is, after all, a historian, takes this folder, goes through it, makes notes, and writes some article or book. And as a historian, he has to reference the archive, such and such inventory, such and such collection, such and such page. And he does exactly that. And he proves some idea of his, for example, it doesn't really matter which one. And, as a historian, he cites archival documents. And when another historian wants to check whether historian Isaev wrote everything correctly, whether he drew the right conclusions, he goes to the same archive and says, "Look, there's this inventory, this archival collection, this page. I'd like to check historian Isaev to see if he copied these numbers correctly or whatever." They tell him that folder is classified. The historian says, "But you gave it to Isaev, and he wrote an article and a book, but you won't give it to me. You're not authorized." That's why all the writings by Mr. Isaev can be read and believed like the Bible, but you can't verify them for the simple reason that he uses classified archives, which are given to him in portions, and only those archives that are convenient for the authorities at that particular moment. That's why, to me, Isaev is not a historian.
Is that a good thing? And what about Nikolai Starikov? What do you have to say about him? He also talked about the problem of the revolution, gave lectures on it, specifically about the beginning of World War II. Sort of, well, from his own, from your 314.
He's just as much a falsifier as Comrade Isaev. He knows perfectly well that when the Bolsheviks came to power, they destroyed the economy by 90%. But he writes to you that this was the result of the Civil War. Apparently, factories and plants were destroyed. He's a typical falsifier who knows the real facts perfectly well, but writes the exact opposite. Yes.
Well, the Russian Empire was more of an agrarian country then. Well,
It was mostly agrarian, but at the beginning of the 20th century, in terms of industrial growth rates, the Russian Empire was among the top 5, the top 10 most developed countries in the world. At the same time, the majority of the population, 80%, lived in rural areas, and there were 5 industrial regions in Russia. These were the region of modern-day Baltics, the region of modern-day Poland, the Moscow and Moscow region, eastern Ukraine, Donbass and Krybuz, and the region of modern Azerbaijan, where oil was extracted. These industrial regions made it possible for Russia to be among the top 10 most developed countries in the world.
All right. So why didn't Nicholas II manage to hold on to power? Well, why did he turn out to be weak, in your opinion?
Because he didn't carry out any reforms. When he was offered reforms, Witt proposed them at the end of the 19th and the beginning of the 20th century. He didn't want those reforms. When he finally agreed to these reforms, it was only as a result of the revolution that took place in Russia from 1905 to 1907. He partially agreed to these reforms, but by then it was already too late. When Stolypin proposed agrarian reforms to him, and Nicholas II agreed to this agrarian reform, it failed because it was already too late. These reforms needed to be carried out on time at the end of the 19th century. The reforms carried out by Alexander II in the middle of the second half of the 19th century actually led to Russia breaking through to the economic leaders. But after that, no more reforms were implemented. And reforms need to be carried out constantly. But the Tsarist regime tried to preserve everything as it was and not touch anything. That's why this whole thing exploded. Reforms needed to be carried out.
All right. So, the Bolsheviks, even though they were in the minority, there were fewer of them. How did it happen that they won the Civil War? Because, well, they were fighting on all fronts, basically surrounded. Even, what's his name, Kolchak made it all the way to the Urals, even further. So, how did the Bolsheviks?
Let me explain how the Bolsheviks did it. There were many factors. Factor number one, the Bolsheviks seized two main industrial regions, the Moscow region, which I mentioned to you, and the eastern Ukrainian industrial region. These are the main industrial regions, Donbass and Donbass. Kolchak was in Siberia. That's not an industrial region. There were no armament bases there. He was supplied with weapons by the British and the Americans. The Bolsheviks produced their own weapons at their own factories, which they did not destroy. They forced workers to work for a ration of bread, for rotten herring. But nevertheless, they controlled the industrial regions. That's one. Second, gentlemen, Kolchak, Denikin, Yudenik, Wrangel, and so on did not act together, which allowed the Bolsheviks to defeat them one by one. So, first they could eliminate, for example, the front with Kolchak, then eliminate the front with Denikin, and then with Wrangel. These white forces never united. That's the second reason. The third reason is that during the Civil War, the Bolsheviks managed to win over the majority of the peasantry. When the Bolsheviks came to power, they declared all land to be state property. The entire harvest was declared state property, and as a result, the peasants didn't want to work or hand over their grain. But when the whites came to these territories, whether it was Denikin, Wrangel, or Kolchak, they returned the land to the landlords who had owned it before. Peasants were flogged and shot for having, during the Bolshevik takeover, looted the landlords' estates and killed the landlords. And when the peasants had to choose between the bad Bolsheviks, who took away both their harvest and their land, and the bad whites, who returned the land to the owners, the landlords, and shot peasants for having killed landlords in the past, in the end, the peasants chose the Bolsheviks. Out of two evils, the peasantry chose the lesser evil. If you went to school and read the wonderful work by Shalikov and Quiet Flows the Dawn, all of this is shown through the example of Grigory Melikov. When he fought, sometimes for the Bolsheviks, sometimes for the whites, he kept switching from one army to another, and in the end, he stayed on the side of the Bolsheviks, because as a peasant, as a Cossack, he chose the lesser evil. This is an example. This is a brilliant novel for which Shalikov received the Nobel Prize, because this novel perfectly depicted the peasants 80% of the former Russian Empire, who in the end chose the bad Bolsheviks. That's why the Bolsheviks won. I've only named 3 factors for you, and there are many more.
No, I agree with you. I'm just interested in your opinion.
I have the same opinion. I have historical conclusions. You have your opinions.
And conclusions as well. No, my conclusion too is that, after all, the people supported the Bolsheviks. Maybe.
The people supported the Bolsheviks not because the Bolsheviks defended the people's interests, but because they chose the lesser evil, for which they later suffered during the famines of 1921 to 1923 and 1932 to 1933. I'm not even talking about 1946 to 1947. So they made their choice and paid the price.
Well, but the Soviet Union's economy still somehow grew in the 1950s, and, like,
It grew, of course, after the war, they rebuilt. It grew, sure. They even sent Comrade Gagarin into space. At the same time, there was no toilet paper. People wiped themselves with newspapers and in the stores.
in short, half of it was just water.
And the stores were empty. But hey, at least we went to space. Did that somehow make life easier for the people?
Well, I'm from the South, so I can't really say much about food here, but my parents always said, in the South, food was always fine.
Yeah, in the South, because there were these garden plots and private households. And we had it better with food than in the central regions of Russia. I'm not even talking about Siberia, because we live, and you live, in the Black Earth Zone. Here, under any government, even the wildest one, you can somehow manage to survive. But in 32 to 33, people didn't survive. We lost 4 million people to hunger in the Black Earth regions.
A lot of people died in Krasnodar Krai too. In Krasnodar Krai and Volgograd, everyone basically suffered from hunger. Well, okay, but here, for many of us, it's kind of.
Artificial.
It was everywhere.
No,
It was artificial in Kuban too.
no.
But how is it in Kuban? Why, if it's Black Earth land? If yours was artificial, and ours.
Ours was artificial from the end of 32 to the beginning of 33, when villages were deliberately surrounded by police and military units, and everything was taken from the peasants, including the food that was in the oven. That's what artificial famine is.
Well, it was the same in Volgograd region, and in Kuban too.
There was a poor harvest. It was connected to the building of collective farms. But in Ukraine, the famine of 32 to early 33 was purely arti facile. They were simply starving people. That's called terror by hunger, so that Ukrainian peasants wouldn't rise up against Soviet power.
So it was done on purpose.
Yes, it was done deliberately, so that people would die deliberately. That's why we call it Holodomor. An artificial famine.
Many historians many historians claim that supposedly the famine was caused because the West demanded in exchange for our, well, industrialization.
Yes,
Well, grain.
they took all the grain from the peasants. The peasants worked on collective farms. The land belonged to the collective farm. The harvest belonged to the collective farm. The entire harvest was taken and sent abroad for gold. With that gold, they bought foreign specialists, American, German. With that gold, they bought power plants and so on and so forth. And that's the reason for the famine. And we also had an artificial famine when they deliberately took not only what belonged to the collective farm, but also what belonged to the peasant from their homes. They starved people to death. Whole villages, entire districts.
I understand you. I understand. You know, I kind of understand the Ukrainian mentality a little because here in Kuban we have a lot of people who came from Ukraine. Like, yeah, my grandfather himself was from Ukraine. He moved here too. So, I get it. I've encountered it myself. You know, there's a mentality, like, there's a Jewish mentality, there's the mentality of a Kakol, Kuban people, Ukrainians. You see, there is. Well, I totally get it. So, maybe it's because of greed. Well, anything's possible. I don't. Now, look, okay. Somewhere around 1930, Stalin said, if we don't build up the country in 10 years, because by 1930, we were already 50 years behind the West. And, you know, Stalin also said that if we don't build up the country in 10 years, we'll be swept away. So everything that happened over those 10 years, the famine, the creation of collective farms, the seizure of part of Poland, the seizure of part of Finland, and so on. All of that was absolutely necessary, mainly for victory in the big war.
Do you believe Stalin?
If the Bolshevik, well, what does it mean to believe? You see, it's Stalin.
If it weren't for Stalin, World War II would not have started. Stalin was preparing to attack, not to defend the Soviet Union. Stalin was preparing for expansion.
Well, I read
Stalin was preparing.
Suvorov.
I say again, Stalin was preparing to expand the territory of the Soviet Union. This is precisely why the modernization was carried out. That's exactly why factories and plants were being purchased. And according to modern calculations, in the 1930s, the highest rates of economic growth were in the military-industrial complex. For example, the amount of ammunition increased by 40 to 42% per year, while the economy was growing by 16% per year. Ammunition production was increasing by 40 to 42%. Stalin was preparing for an offensive war. And whatever he said in open sources was just to fool people. But historians don't trust open sources. They use archival sources and look at what really happened. Not Stalin's speeches. That he supposedly predicted the Second World War there. And so, it was necessary to destroy 4 million Ukrainian peasants in order to win the Second World War. But it could have been done without killing 4 million. Couldn't it? You see, when you say if only, it seems like you're talking about facts, conclusions. I'm not saying if. Where did I say if only here? Stalin was preparing for an offensive war. That's without any if only. There are tons of archival documents that say so. You have an excellent historian, not Dukov or that other falsifier, but Doctor of Historical Sciences Meltyakov. I tell everyone about his book, published in 2015 and 2019. Doctor of Historical Sciences Dmitry Alexandrovich Meltyakov. The book is called Stalin's Mischance, where it is clearly laid out what kind of war Stalin was preparing for. And all that talk about how we had to hurry up and do everything quickly or else we'd be attacked. That was just for fools, because Stalin himself was trying to attack, and he did attack. He started his aggression in 1939 with Poland.
He was the first with them. The first wasn't Meltyakov, it was Suvorov. Reason. What's his name? Reason.
Suvorov put forward this idea, but he didn't have documentary evidence because he didn't work in the archives. He came to this conclusion based on indirect evidence. Based on indirect evidence as a spy. But Meltyakov, as an archivist, went into the archives, which were still more or less open at that time. And the archives he relies on can be double-checked, because those are the archival files that were opened, unlike Dukov, who writes his works and Tizaev, who writes his works based on the closed part of the archive which can't be verified. And Meltyakov can be cross-checked. And no one can refute Meltyakov's point of view because he proved it with archival data. Did I understand you correctly?
I'll analyze your words in the same way. I'm not a historian like you. I'm just a history enthusiast.
Well, you need to read real historians, not Isaev and that other guy you mentioned, who's a falsifier.
Well, it's not just about Stalin, not just about Starikov, not just about that. You see what I mean? I also believe my grandmother, who was born during Stalin's time. I also believe my grandfather, whose parents fought for the White Army and who the Bolsheviks, well, you know. And he was the first one, back in the 80s, who would hit anyone who said anything bad about Stalin, he said. You didn't live in those times, so don't talk about it.
Well, your grandfather was poisoned by Stalinist propaganda. What can I do about that?
No, he wasn't poisoned. He was a Kazakh who was dispossessed.
A Kazakh dispossessed by the Bolshevik authorities, and yet he defended Stalin. You don't see any contradiction there, do you?
Yeah, life's a strange thing. There's a lot that doesn't make sense.
So if your grandfather defended Stalin, that means we all have to defend Stalin just because he was your grandfather?
Why should everyone?
And what does your grandfather have to do with it? Your grandfather is just one example when someone had everything taken away, property, land, and so on. And he keeps on praising Stalin. He says, I'll punch anyone who's against Stalin.
Well, he's already passed away.
80% of the population in Russia are just like that. They're sent to the front, hundreds of thousands die, end up as prisoners. Who sent them there? Putin. But Putin is a hero.
Well, everyone has their own idea. I don't want to get into it. It's a tough question.
What's your idea? What about your Putin? To destroy Ukraine? How do you support that idea?
Honestly, I really don't understand. I just don't.
Then why do 80% of your population support killing Ukrainians?
They don't support it.
What do you mean? They don't support it. Where is the dissatisfaction being shown then?
And even with Stalin, as you say, 80% don't support Stalin. Very few people support Stalin. Very few people.
I believed you right away. You see, young man, there are sociological studies being conducted in your country. They say the exact opposite. And what you're telling me now, that people don't support Stalin in your country, right? Read any sociological study about Stalin and about your population's attitude towards Stalin. And when it's Stalin's birthday, people bring tons of flowers to his grave behind the mausoleum, tons. They don't bring flowers to Khrushchev, they don't bring them to Brezhnev, not even to Lenin, and they don't bring them to Andropov either. But Stalin's grave is covered with flowers, so don't tell me fairy tales.
Everyone has what right?
Of course, everyone has the right, but the majority of your population supports Stalin and supports Putin. And you're telling me the opposite. Thank you. I've heard you.
I haven't really conducted a sociological survey, but kind of.
Well, go read the ones that are already done, your acquaintances. You live in your own closed-off world where your acquaintances don't support it. But there's sociology. It's a science.
All right, fine. But how? You know, I've never once been selected for a sociological survey. No one has ever called me. I've never gone anywhere.
You've never been selected, but others have. Ew, for what? So are sociologists just making things up out of thin air or what? Your society is Stalinist. Your society is Putinist. And you even said that your grandfather was exactly the same. And my grandfather truly believed in Stalin and died as an invader in the Winter War. So what? Am I supposed to bring flowers to his grave now and say, Grandpa, You were such a great guy. You died for Stalin, for the Soviet Union.
But thanks to your grandfather, you were born.
I had 5 grandfathers in one family, young man. 5 grandfathers and 2 grandmothers. My great-grandfather had 7 children. One was eaten in 32 to 33. One died in the Winter War as an invader. And it was from the 3rd grandfather that my family line comes, the cousin one.
A cousin grandfather? You mean a cousin grandfather?
I didn't come from a cousin grandfather. Are you even normal? My great-grandfather had 5 sons and 2 daughters. Where's the cousin in that?
Got it. No, Will, the cousin grandfather went to the Winter War. Or are you descended from him? You just said one grandfather was there.
I'll say it again. 5 grandfathers, one was eaten, Grandpa Ivan, in 32, he was an infant. The second one, Grandpa Kostya, was killed as an officer in the Winter War. But Vasily survived.
And you're descended from him, right?
Yes, and the 4th grandfather moved to you, to Krasnodar Krai, to Gorayaki Klayak. And that's where our family line continues. And the 5th one, I don't even remember anymore how high. My father was born from Vasily.
So that's your biological grandfather, and the rest are cousins, right?
Maybe I misunderstood something.
Well, that's exactly what I'm talking about now.
So what am I supposed to do now? Praise my Grandpa Kostya? Like I said, my Grandpa Kostya died for Stalin. So I shouldn't have anything against Stalin, and I'll punch anyone who speaks against him.
No.
But you said exactly the same thing that your grandfather, who suffered because of Stalin, your biological grandfather, who suffered under Stalin, would tell everyone afterwards.
I just gave that as an example.
That he'd beat up anyone who was against Stalin. Do you think that's normal?
Well, I didn't say beat up. I didn't actually say beat up. I don't even use words like that. I just said it a bit differently, but not beat up.
What's the difference?
We're just talking about the essence, just having a conversation, not about the wording, right? I'm just saying, just painting a picture, just talking. I don't know what your interest is in talking to me, right? My interest is kind of to sketch out your psychological profile, right?
My psychological profile? Are you a psychologist?
Oh,
You want to sketch out my psychological profile? Are you a psychologist?
no, not a psychologist.
So why do you need my psychological profile?
Well, I just, sometimes listen to your streams or, what should I call them in chat roulette? Just, to understand for what purpose. Why, as you say, why do you say it that way? And what are you basing it on, right? The first time I heard it there, well, on Facebook, I hang out on Facebook a lot. Well, when I have time, I either play chess or read the news, just like before, whenever I have a moment. And you often ended up there, just because some things interested you. But mostly, the arguments there are about nothing, when people interrupt you, are rude, or whatever else, so it's really just for myself. Like when I paint a picture, everyone has their own interpretation, they rely on their own.
Knowledge. What kind of conclusion if you take a real historian, not Isaev, not a falsifier? Take Melnikov and read his work. So what are you telling me here?
For you, he's normal. History is written by the victors, for everyone. Do you understand? What kind of nonsense?
Are you spouting? What history? Exactly. You're talking absolute nonsense. You're repeating a phrase whose meaning you don't even understand. Let's take the example of World War II. I'll show you that your phrase, history is written by the victors, is nonsense. Do you want me to?
Go ahead, fine.
In World War II, the Soviet Union won and Germany lost. Right?
Yes.
Soviet historians wrote their own version of World War II. Do you think German historians didn't have the right to write their own version?
It's fading a little now. German what? In.
The war between Germany and the Soviet Union won. Soviet historians, as you say, the victors, wrote the history of World War II. Did German historians have the right to write their own history of World War II? Of course. Well, look, let's take a moment to truly consider this situation and deeply reflect on all the potential implications and ramifications that might arise from it.
Does.
The phrase history is written by the victors reflect reality? Can't the defeated write history?
They did.
They did. Is your statement objective? Does it reflect reality?
Well, look.
I'll say it again. Logic.
I'm explaining to you.
You don't need to explain to me. I'm a self-sufficient person. I want an answer from you. Did German historians write the history of World War II?
I'm answering you. They did. Yes.
Or no?
Yes, they did.
Yes, they did. They were the defeated.
The defeated. So from here.
The phrase, history is written by the victors. Does that reflect reality? Maybe history is written by both the victors and the defeated?
Can I answer without being interrupted?
No, you can't.
Because.
You're being asked a specific question. Is the phrase history is written by the victors correct in the context where both the victors and the defeated wrote the history of World War II?
They did.
We did. So, the phrase history is written by the victors. How much does it actually reflect reality?
All right.
It doesn't reflect reality at all, because history is written by both the victors and the defeated. So, the conclusion is, the phrase history is written by the victors is meaningless. Have I proven my point to you or not? Or do you want to add something else?
No, I don't want to argue. You've kind of proven it. I laid it out for you logically.
The conclusion that the phrase history is written by the victors. The victors. It's meaningless. I agree with you. So why do you keep using that phrase? There are millions of you walking around here saying it. History is written by the victors. History is written by everyone. The phrase doesn't make sense. Maybe that's the question. The phrase doesn't make sense. You've proven it. I agree. The phrase doesn't make sense. I hear it here every time.
That just clearly shows. Exactly. When precisely did you actually start reading the comprehensive history of a truly defeated Germany, a history that was meticulously written by the very defeated themselves? I started reading from that point, and it was quite an insightful experience.
1985 to 1991, because that's when translated works by German historians on World War II started to appear. And I realized that Soviet historians have falsified the history of World War II. They wrote lies from beginning to end. That's how victors write history.
All right, I get it. Let's talk about another topic now, still about history, but from a different period. So, there are just some moments I want to clarify, to find out for myself. So, Ostap Bender, he was born in the territory of Austria-Hungary, right? Or where exactly was Bender born?
In the mines of Ilf and Petrov, Not
Left pain not because of that. That's how it is.
you.
Ask a question and well, Bender,
There is no Bender.
I almost.
No, Bender is possible. Ask me how to kill this historical figure. I will answer.
Melnikova.
Melnikov was not there.
And how about the process of leaving it behind, considering all the intricate details and potential implications? We need to meticulously plan for its departure, ensuring a smooth and well-organized transition, taking into account every necessary step and contingency.
There was Andrei Angel. There was the unargization of Ukrainian nationalists. There was the UPA, the Ukrainian Insurgent Army. Oops, there was none.
I'm telling you, I don't know. I don't know the exact spelling, so I'm not going to argue. I just want to ask you.
What do you want to ask?
Even a step bender, incorrectly step and bender. So where was he born? Bandera.
Bender. Let's clarify the last name. Let's do that. I'll tell you, Stepan Bandera. And could you repeat that, please?
Stepan Bandera, right? Well,
Wonderful. Let's go.
and Andrei Melnik, right?
That's correct. And Roman Shukovich. Not Shushkovich, like Comrade Putin said yesterday.
My Russian is bad. I even speak a lot of Russian badly. So, well, sorry. I mean, no offense. Just so you know you can understand me too. All right, so they were born in Austria-Hungary, right? And they started this struggle, sort of, regardless of their Ukraine, you know, Western Ukraine or whatever they called it. They actually started against Austria-Hungary and then Poland. How? Well, go ahead. Please tell us.
Austria-Hungary collapsed in 1918. Stepan Bandera was born in 1909. 18 minus 9. What's that?
9 years old. At 9 years old he
Became. Well, Melnik, he was a bit older. At 9 years old, Bandera became a citizen of Poland. How could he have fought against Austria-Hungary when he was only 9?
Let me clarify. So, he was a citizen of Poland, and they started their movement against Poland. He was a citizen
of Austria-Hungary and then a citizen of Poland, and he fought against Poland for the creation of an independent Ukraine.
That's what I wanted to clarify. And who founded this movement?
Yevhen Konovalets.
Yevhen Konovalets. When was that? It was already when he was a citizen of Poland that they started to oppose Poland.
Yevhen Konovalets was never a citizen of Poland. He was a citizen of Lithuania. He had a Lithuanian passport.
All right. No questions here. I just wanted to clarify these points. Just right away. You see, And Andrei Melnik, it turns out, he was also born in Austria-Hungary. Please open Wikipedia.
The Russian one. Everything is written there.
Well, I can still consult with you, right? I don't remember.
Melnik's date of birth. Do you want me to find it for you?
No. I'm just speaking roughly. I told you he's older.
Melnik, then Bandera.
Did I get you right?
Because Melnik fought as a colonel back in the Ukrainian Revolution of 1917 to 1921, he was already a colonel then.
Yeah, some circles do. Scientists from America decided that Genghis Khan. Read less and don't get upset. All right, let's talk about Genghis Khan. He created the largest land empire ever, right? Even now. What kind of empire did he create? Well, what's the question then, right? I don't know. I haven't counted the square kilometers of Genghis Khan's empire. Now, let's get closer. So, the separation, like Russia, the Moscow state. They kind of, like the princes, came from the Kievan princes, right? Like Vladimir, Novgorod, Kiev were there, right? Then their children sort of took over the territory, divided it up, kind of ruled it, quietly split it, moved east, and in the east, then there was the Tatar-Mongol yoke, and the center, then, became Moscow. Here is the division. When it happened, here from Kiev or, like here. Divide.
Boo! What did I hear? Listen to the text of the question. I don't understand.
Okay, as you can clearly see, well, Kiev, or rather, the city of Kiev, which was not wrong, but rather the very place from which Kiev and Novgorod began to collaboratively create the foundational state of Kievan Rus during that significant historical period, right? They, as if following a long-standing tradition, with the children passing on the power and authority, began to rule over various distinct books and principalities, each with its own unique characteristics and governance. Well, that's precisely how it unfolded.
What's the point of the question? Did Vladimir have children? He did. Did those children rule separate principalities? They did. And then what?
Okay, then now, well, give me 5 seconds. Let's quickly rephrase.
Well, excuse me, you can't formulate the question. Well, it's very hard for me to communicate like this. I understand that Russian is your native language. Well, I get it. I'm trying to make allowances for that.
I'll rephrase now, sort of.
So you're interested in what?
It just slipped my mind. It slipped out already.
It's okay. It's just hard for you to ask.
Ask.
You said you have a grandfather there, a native of Ukraine, and you identify yourself from, but what ethnic group?
And how should I feel about it? Look, I'll even tell you the last name here, Volobyov. It's on the internet and here. Volobyov, Ignative. It doesn't make any difference.
Meanings, me, your last name. I didn't ask your last name, Mr. Volobyov. I asked you, which ethnic group do you consider yourself to belong to? None. You don't have an ethnic identity. Next question. No, you are an internationalist. That's the absence of a nation. What is your native language?
I speak Russian. I grew up in Russia.
But you said you have trouble. From a Russian perspective.
We speak poorly. We speak poorly. Do you have
medical issues? Is that why you speak Russian poorly? Yes, medical issues. Or do you have ethnic issues?
I said medical issues.
Understood. That's all. I have no more questions. Did you have any questions?
All right, hold on a second. There's one more thing I'm curious about. Let me rephrase. So, when did the Ukrainian nationality appear? Actually, that word, the term.
Nationality doesn't exist. It was invented by the Bolsheviks. There's the concept of ethnos, which means people in Greek. All peoples in Europe and Ukrainians live in Europe. Geographically, the process of ethnic self-awareness begins somewhere in the 13th to 15th centuries, but there are practically no documents from that period, so we can say that Ukrainians gradually started calling themselves Ukrainians somewhere from the 16th century. But at the same time, Ukrainians also called themselves Rus. Not Russians, but Rus. Because there is a memory of Rus which existed on this territory. And for a very long time, we called ourselves Rus, others called us that, and we also called ourselves Ukrainians. In Russian sources, there are names for us like Cherkasy, Cherkasy. Later, the term Little Russians appeared, but as an ethnic group, Ukrainians began to emerge in the 14th to 16th centuries, just like all other ethnicities in Europe.
Got it. Here's another question that just came up. Are Cherkasy and Cherkasy related in any way? I don't know. Or is it just a coincidence?
It's a coincidence.
All right. So, the formation of the Cossacks. Can you tell me something about it? Which one? The Zaporizhian Cossacks. Well, the Zaporizhian Cossacks. Do you want me to give you a lecture?
On the formation of the Zaporizhian Cossacks? No.
The first mention of Brodny.
The Zaporizhian Cossacks of the Cossacks. End of the 15th century.
All right. Where did they come from?
Who?
Brodny. I mean, the Cossacks. Or are the Cossacks?
A social group that emerged in a territory not under the Khan. Under the control of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, because by the end of the 15th century, most of the territory of Ukraine was part of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. And not under the control of the Crimean Khanate, because the south of Ukraine and Crimea belonged to the Crimean Khanate since the middle of the 15th century. And between the Grand Duchy of Lithuania and the Crimean Khanate, there were territories that were not controlled by anyone. And it was to this territory that different groups of people fled who started calling themselves Cossacks.
But what about the Brodniks?
What about the Brodniks?
When did they appear? Well, have you heard of the Brodniks? Well, I've heard of them. Were they like a people, for example? So, when did they appear and when did they disappear? Ah, you don't know? No. Well, I guess that's everything on that question. Seems like.
That's all for now. Thank God. Good luck to you. Yeah.
Tired.
Of course, it's not just that I'm tired. I'm worn out. When a person can't even formulate a question, well, as they say, that's half the trouble. You try to explain to him that a historian has conclusions, but he keeps insisting that's just your opinion. You can challenge those conclusions or express your own opinion. Well, go ahead, say it, let's talk. It's a nightmare. People live in some kind of world. You could say, that's unreal. Well, maybe it just seems that way to me. Since I'm a historian, I see the situation differently. But he's interested in everything, absolutely everything. She's interested in the Cossacks, the Bolsheviks. The Englishwoman is up to no good. That's terrible, just a nightmare, a real horror.